Bang in the middle of the pandemic, ET began a new adventure in audio journalism, which honestly began as an experiment.
Record चालू है?
From its very first episode, the Morning Brief podcast places content as its centerpiece of the spotlight. Whether it's the big national breaking news or even a small regional story that we find most engrossing, ground reports in breakthrough episodes, or trend spotting much ahead of the curve, you have heard us all the way to our 500th episode that we are dropping today. And hopefully you will agree that TMB, as we call the show internally, stands out from the competition through its storytelling and soundscaping, where business news is not just delivered like a copy-paste from television or print. Content is really the king. And I mean really. And the award-winning journalists from ET, the Sutradhars of the new era of news delivery for corporate leaders and decision makers. As we look back at 2023, the first thing that struck me is how the TMB tribe has grown.
I'm your host, Apurva Mittal.
Nidhi Sharma with the Political Pulse.
This is Pratik Bhakta.
Hey, this is Shafali Bhatt.
Prachi Verma from the Economic Times.
It's not just about adding heft to the team. Through the year, we have delved into more and more nuanced and complex topics and tried to break it down in simple, accessible formats and narratives. From shocking investigations, remember the Mahadev betting scam, where we took you all the way from Bhilai to Dubai, or where we unveiled the dark side of WhatsApp's con calls, to
the shocking dark side of live streaming and sleaze.
Have you ever wondered how green is your organic product?
Is a fatigued, unfocused pilot operating your flight?
Is your city on the brink of collapse like Joshimath?
We also decided to get out of our comfort zones and go right to the field for path-breaking ground reporting to find out about what it would take for Gautam Adani to be Dharavi's new Dada. And across the country, election coverage took us to the heart of Bastar.
I'm here in Naxal stronghold in Chhattisgarh.
Talking to milk producers here in Mandya in Karnataka, you realize that the milk politics in the state is souring.
Standing here at Tata Hospital, you understand the true cost of India's growing cancer burden.
I'm in Surat, where a $1 billion crisis faces the 100-year-old diamond industry.
Here in Ratnagiri, we explore why Asia's biggest refinery never took off.
We also focused on opinions and interviews, shaping policy and perception. From a global exclusive with Sam Altman to the investor who made billions taking contra bet on the house of Adani's. That's Rajiv Jain of GQG Partners and many others.
IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav decodes the new data protection bill for us.
I'm in conversation with the controversial liver doc.
With me, a candid and cool Varun Berry of Britannia.
But news always comes first. A new listing from Tata's, a new company from Reliance, and the star of the startups fading fast.
Byju's the educator is getting schooled now.
The big get bigger. Find out what geofinancial is all about.
Placement pressure, insight, and IIT placement cell.
The election playbook is now writing a whole new chapter.
But at the same time, we also kept an eye on what's buzzing.
From romance to Bollywood, the Bazigar of Bollywood, SRK. Time to tally up. The Karobar of running a bar.
Lace up sneakerheads. We've got the OG Nike designer all the way from Portland to India just for you.
It's December 8th, and you're listening to a special drop, the 500th episode of the Morning Brief. From the Economic Times, I am Arijit Barman. On the other side, the entire TMB team is mic'd up. So get ready to go behind the scenes to find out what makes TMB tick.
1 second. Sound. Check.
Guys, if there's a problem, let's switch to Zoom.
Sound check to kar lo.
Is this so? I just want to ask Rajas if this sound is fine.
Check.
I can hear her clearly.
Can you say a few words?
Yes. Am I audible? Okay, I can't hear you guys.
What?
Oh, yeah. 1 second.
Hello.
Okay. Kiran, stay awake. You can stay with us, Kiran. Let's not lose you, Kiran. Can you guys hear me now?
Perfect.
Check.
I think Arijit's sounding a little roomy, right?
Am I still sounding roomy?
Check.
Do we have to keep the camera on?
Anirban, you have to keep your camera on. It's very nerve-wracking.
Hello.
Can you hear me out there?
Is there anybody out there?
Is anybody out there?
Earth calling.
Hi, I'm Rajas. Let me introduce you to our lovely production team.
Hi, I'm Sumit Pandey. This is Vinay Joshi.
Hi, this is Sarohini Jain.
This is Vinayak Agrawal.
On sound, I am Indra.
This is Amrit Redji.
It's a full house for this Friday episode, and why not? It's the 500th episode for the TMB tribe, and Anirban, I must say that it's a better attendance than most of our edit meetings.
Yeah, for sure. This is quite different from the morning edit meeting that we have on Thursdays. And I must say that, I will keep getting into a little bit of nostalgia for this episode because it's the 500th episode. The morning meetings actually started at noon at 12, and then it was shifted to 11:30, then 11, then 10:30, 10, 9:30, and now it's come to 8:30 a.m. So clearly the decision makers in this podcast are early risers. And I can say that I've kind of got back at you guys because I'm a night owl. So let's get this started. Like I said, this episode is kind of an intersection between the milestone that we've reached, which is episode 500, and the year gone by, which was extremely newsy, extremely full of content. Yeah. And I think TMB was sort of dilating and stuck between following the news cycle, the madness of the news cycle, or introspecting about the big news that had happened like a week back or a few days back with deep dives and deep analysis. I think a good way to start this discussion would be the major themes, the bigger themes that jumped out at each of us. And I think one theme that we should start with is concentration of power.
Well, when we started this year, we started with, not this year actually, let me go back even further than that. When we started TMB, I wasn't there, but one person who definitely was Arijit Barman. And if you had the scroll and you took the incessant scroll, or the endless scroll as it's now called, Shefali, if I'm not wrong, right? The endless scroll down to the first episode, you can hear Arijit Barman talking about the Tatas and the SP and the Cyrus Mystery Control all the way back then. And we're back here 500 episodes later. And we're still talking about the same group, same names, just bigger, maybe better, but definitely bigger. Right, Arijit?
Yeah. And call it consolidation or call it a worrying trend. This kind of consolidation of power, consolidation of influence is unprecedented in corporate Indian history. It's the same 5 or 6 large groups that are getting into multiple businesses, buying out smaller businesses or businesses which are highly levered. Tata's got Air India, Reliance, a slew of acquisitions from retail to startups to bringing back Campa Cola and many others. Adani's, of course, that's a different story. The dominant corporate story of this year. And on the other side, private equity. That became almost like conglomerates, buying, selling companies.
You made a mention of aviation, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that because, there is news now that Go First, as it's now called, is also falling by the wayside. Its lenders are now probably preparing to liquidate the airline. And it's amazing how this has played out this last year. And SpiceJet, the only thing that it's sort of spending its energies on right now is denying stories about its, financial and safety and operational problems. Akasa is a fledgling airline with a lot of promise, but that's got its own problems. As you said, Tata bought over Air India, and it's already also got Vistar and AirAsia. And with the top Indian airline, which is the biggest Indian airline, that's Indigo, they actually control 91% of the market. So if this is not concentration of power, what is? So I think aviation is a pretty big example, but it's definitely not the only one.
We talked about telecom last year as well, because at the beginning of the year, Idea had all the problems, and it was at the ET Awards a bit later where Sunil Bharti Mittal said, we're not a small industry by choice. It's by what's happened to the industry that we've reached here. But the concentration we've seen this year has been largely by choice. And Ratna can chime in, because I remember every time we talked about consumer and we wanted to talk about what episodes to do next, and in our edit meeting, and we'd say, why don't we talk about cola, or why don't we talk about beauty, which was with Shabori, and we say, no, we just did the same group last week. Now, every week we can't do the same group again and again. But you realized, as we said, the sector list got longer, Ratna, but the ownership list got smaller and smaller.
Yeah, absolutely, Anupriya. That was actually the case. And despite they being deeply entrenched sort of players in other categories, the big group did make a dent. They created that stir. They shook up the competition, and just a start. But, in times to come, there's going to be a lot of flutter in the market, in the consumer market. The bigger guys who are swooping down on all kinds of, on different consumer cohorts. So there is no category which is untouched. And that is shaking up so many sectors within the consumer sector, within the consumer group, foods, fashion, apparel, so much. Retail is one big thing. There's luxury, there's entry level, rural. I would say that the consumer sector has really seen a big shake-up this year in 2023. And also, on one hand, we have the big guy. On the other hand, we have the local guys who are, really shaking up the middle, not the bottom of the pyramid, not the top end, but it's the middle, which is really going through a big shake-up. So it's very interesting. And a lot of paradigms are being reset, and companies are really fast tracking on, what was last year is not going to happen this year, and next year is going to be completely different.
I'll just add to what Ratna just said. Just one set of numbers involving one conglomerate. This conglomerate, and I will ask a question at the end of it, this conglomerate had a $150 billion investment spree over the past decade. Today, it controls 15% of the total fixed capital deployed at India's top 300 non-financial companies. It single-handedly employs 7% of India's workforce. It generates 10% of combined EBITDA of India Inc. Its chairman in the last AGM said, "We are no longer a corporate, but a precious Indian institution." Can anyone guess the name? I think it's no-brainer. Reliance Industries. So that's the kind of concentration of power, influence that we are talking about. I mean, as I said, Adani's, despite the bazooka that hit them in January with the short seller report, the market value of the group today is a staggering $167 billion. It is still 70 billion short of the level before the short seller attack in January, but $170 billion of market cap for one group. These are just mouth-watering, eye-popping, call it what you may, unbelievable numbers.
So I'm going to flip this around now, Ajit. You're talking about numbers that went up and up. There was an entire other segment that just saw numbers coming down and down, which was the entire startup phenomena. I mean, 2021, 22 was where we saw everything go from zero to bazooka numbers. And here we're seeing now the stars of the startup starting to fade and fade very fast. So I'm going to head across to Bangalore, where Mukta gets a ringside view of the startup phenomena. She also gets a ringside view because she actually can't get into the traffic and meet anybody. So she has to get a ringside view. But Mukta, it's been a turbulent year. Watching some of these numbers devolve. I know we're sitting just a few days away before Byju's has their much awaited AGM, but it's been a house of cards, literally.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a year of reckoning for startups. Everything that they did over the past few years has finally caught up with them. And, while a lot of startups were in crisis this year, I'll name three big companies that kind of, were in deep trouble, and for different reasons. You had a Dunzo, which seemed to just have a flawed business model. The expenses that they had over the past year as they got into a new vertical of quick commerce and then on advertising, etc., I think that just really dragged this the OG of hyper local, it's completely now almost run to the ground. The
Interestingly, Mukta, the Reliance company.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of this unfolded after Reliance put in a stake in them. The other one is Farm Easy, because it was a very peculiar kind of a situation, because this company had taken so much debt over the past couple of years. So it's caught in a kind of a debt trap. And to get out of it, it had to do an internal round at a 95% discount. And we saw that one of the steepest fall in valuations with Farm Easy. And then Byju's, of course, is a known story. It's still unraveling. But I think that is a case of corporate governance gone completely wrong. The financials not being out in time, even things like the company not depositing the PF of employees in their EPFO accounts and, things like that. So different reasons, but yes, for startups, this definitely, like I said, was a year of...
And again here, I would say concentration, because there's one man who's now cherry picking the best assets at rock bottom price. That's Ranjan Pai.
Absolutely. He's the white knight, seems like, for a lot of founders and a lot of startups.
So you know who to speak to or try to get on TMB next year. You said governance, and governance always gets Kiran's ears up immediately. In any meeting that we do, that's governance is very high up on Kiran's list. So Kiran, you started the year with Mama Earth, but it's been a full circle with Mama Earth. To just reflect what Mukta was saying, the valuation in December, the halablu about it, and Mama Earth mange more and not really got what Mama wanted.
Yeah, of course. We saw them coming a full circle, but eventually they got listed. The year started with them kind of looking at the kind of valuations, and then they got humbled down, and then the valuations that they finally came in, still people didn't want that. Like market didn't really accept that, and then stock, even after getting listed, didn't really fare well. So profitability did become the focus for many startups now. The unit economics came into picture. So the year was, as Mugdha pointed out, reckoning for many startups. They went back to their drawing rooms, and governance became an aspect where startups were kind of pulled up, and VCs and PEs started talking about governance. Earlier, it was easy money being thrown. Now, governance also started being looked at. And we have seen so many governance issues now. All the startups that you named, somewhere the governance is a concern there. And it was not just startups. Like we had MNCs, were they being justified in charging royalties? So that issue had come up. Then, HUL. We also saw SEBI's regulations. Like SEBI has been so active. Like our episode did say that it's SEBI on steroids. And it continues to be so. So governance has been kind of, while companies are waking up to it, investors are asking for it, regulators are pushing it. So, it's something that you can't just ignore now.
I remember the grilling that Kiran did of Varun Alag. I mean, difficult questions. I think the market to baad mein grill karega, but the kind of stuff that Kiran asked, I mean, they was quite sort of taken aback. And I think those two are definitely my favorite episodes. If we can talk about, if we can be a little self-congratulatory in our 500th episode.
So Kiran talked about belt tightening, which takes us across, Anirban, possibly to what's really happening on the ground when corporates start to tighten their belt. I know Arijit said that 7% of the employment comes from one single entity, but across the board, what's happening with employment is not something that is happier to write home about, one would say.
For sure. I think the topics that we are dealing with today permeate each other so much. So, I mean, Mugdha talked about Byju's and the first set of people who brought out the wrongdoings at Byju's were its employees. I mean, those videos that came out talking about how bad a workplace it is, which brought out, the theme of toxic culture, which everybody began to talk about. And then, of course, we had other examples, that very viral HDFC video that was a fodder for a lot of memes, but also, gave rise to a lot of questions about what's really happening at workplaces, the kind of targets that the middle management is giving its team, etc., etc. And I really like the episode that Apurva did about the toxic work culture that's permeating companies across sectors.
Yeah, I think personally to me also was a very important episode because I was not only seeing that play out on social media, but also in my conversation with a lot of people, a lot of young people and the kind of burden and the pressure they were under. So it felt like a really important conversation to touch upon. And I think what really made the episode stand out was the fact that we had actual numbers from banking sector which showed high attrition among young folks. But I think one thing that I would like to highlight is like while reporting the episode and talking to a lot of people and getting their sound bites, it kind of went into like a therapy session for them and for the people I was speaking to, because they were really venting out and sharing like whatever toxicity they had experienced. And later, a bunch of them did message that it was like cathartic for them, or they want to, take up their show again with their organization. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it felt like the impact of the episode was, of course, highlighting what we were seeing in numbers and social media clips, but also in individuals' life and how personal it can get for people.
Yeah, and I remember while doing the episode, I won't obviously name the bank, but one of the banks went berserk about a set of questions that we'd sent them. I mean, we hadn't even reported, but they were like, no, we are not that bank. We deal with our employees very differently, etc., etc. And I mean, obviously, we didn't edit out anything because it was a completely solid episode, but that's every day for a journalist anyway. But on jobs, I mean, jobs been a bigger story this year, right? Right from Mr. Narayan Murthy's statement on the 70-hour week to the reactions that came to it, and what's been actually happening in terms of job numbers. I mean, we are looking at very, very bleak numbers, which Prachi has dealt with in an episode that just landed yesterday.
Yeah, so it's not a very great scene. We actually covered some stories at the campuses, and this episode was all about the IITs. The salaries over there are dropping this year. So are the offers. The recruiters list is also getting leaner. So things are really not great. And of course, even at B schools like IIMs, some schools had issues even placing students in the summer placement. So these are some unheard of stories that, we haven't seen. These are not great signs, but the question is whether it's going to percolate up in the mid and the senior level. That is to be seen.
Prachi, I want to just ask you this. I mean, you've been covering this segment for a very, very long time. You've gone to campuses over and over again over the last decade. But like you said in the episode as well, this time it felt different.
It did feel different. I'll just tell you one instance. So I was at IIT Delhi last week, but there was this bunch of fourth year students, mechanical engineering. And I was just asking them, about the scene at the campus. So, one student among them got a pre-placement offer, and that was like a 44 lakh per annum offer. And he said, while I got this offer, I was thinking, am I, doing a mistake by accepting it? Should I wait for the final placements, which would start in December? But now I'm feeling very lucky to have this offer because, my friends here, they're not getting jobs, like they were rejected. And the recruiters are very, very picky about who they want to hire this year. So that's the scene at IITs.
But Anirban, oddly enough, India seems to be shining, growing at almost 7%. That's the GDP growth numbers. I mean, are we missing something? I mean, when you talk to people, everybody seems to be wanting to invest, wanting to double down. But listening to Prachi, it feels rather somber.
It does. And it actually reminds me, and I will talk about consumption also here because it's quite a sort of a barometer of how a country and its economy are doing. And it reminds me of an episode I did on the great sort of economic divide and how, the basic age-old difference between the haves and have-nots growing, and how, luxury cars are selling so much and business class tickets are selling really high-end phones are selling. But then in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, inflation's really hitting people and the companies are really bearing the brunt of sales when you go to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So it is actually interesting, unfortunate, ominous, I mean, whatever way you want to call it. And I think the next year will be fairly interesting in how this sort of pans out.
If I can just chime in, the divide comes from a single street in Bombay, which is Dalal Street. That's the divide. That's the difference in why people are not getting jobs and people are still buying luxury cars, because the Nifty is where it's at and the Sensex is where it's at. And people's 1 billion in a company have made them 7 billion over the last 1 year. And that's why this great divide is coming in. It's not percolating through the new job comers. As of now, the only beneficiaries of those numbers have been the mutual fund and the top end market operators, if I may call them that.
Yeah.
And SEBI can be on steroids, but it doesn't stop those who have to make money or are doing it legitimately. There is nothing illegitimate. It's a market that's just one way upwards.
And Anupriya, sorry, if you can contrast that with, a Nidhi, who's just come back touring several states, the Labhartis, as we call them. Every party, whether it's the Bharatiya Janata Party, Congress, it's all about freebies. And Labhartis now has become a factor that swings significant vote share. Nidhi?
So it's actually, I feel that, the real election issues are no longer real issues. It's like inflation doesn't matter. Joblessness doesn't matter. Nothing matters. When I was traveling very recently, when I was traveling through Rajasthan, I was so surprised that, the cotton crop had failed. Rice, the paddy had been affected by unseasonal rains. There was a boar attack on, their another crop, like maize was hit. Nothing seemed to have mattered to them. It was all about who is going to give us free electricity. This administration has promised us 100 units and the other has promised us 200 units. So it's strange. It's like a competitive freebie season there. And it's not just the freebies as if, roti kapda makan needs to be taken care of. It's also the aspirational aspect that the parties have taken care of. Ashok Gehlot government in Rajasthan has not only given smartphones to girls of class 9th or 10th, they've even given tablets free.
So Nidhi spoke about cell phones, and I'll make a very, very forced segue into tech because that's what we want to talk about. And we were talking about the job sector, which is really, really bleak when it comes to tech. But tech itself has been like really big this year. There have been massive stories, right? From Apple's manufacturing plans to AI to semiconductors to, a lot of regulations that came in. The government has been fairly proactive. At least when it comes to the latest set of regulations that it's bringing in on deepfakes. So, Diya, you've done a lot of episodes on tech, Diya and Mugdha both, but I'd like to start with Diya. What were the top stories? What did you really like podcasting on when it came to tech?
Thanks, Anirban. And like you mentioned, tech is such a broad sort of spectrum. It covers so much. And I think a lot of people have done episodes like that are related to tech. So when I speak of my episodes, I feel like one of the common themes that I saw was just the advancement in technology in general. And I know, I get fed up of saying the word, but it's everywhere. It's like AI this, and we are an AI first company, and we are this and that. And it's like recently someone came up to me and said, we're an AI first company and they make soaps. So it's like crazy, no, it's just like you make soap. You don't need to be AI first, So I think that was the big overarching theme in terms of my episodes at least. But I felt like we tried to go beyond what was in the news and really looked at the flip side of things, that it definitely brings in the opportunity, but we're seeing a lot of things that are not so good as well. So I think that was the very interesting aspect of our episodes on TMB, whether it was the episode that we did on, the business of sleaze, where there are a lot of people who are getting on social media apps and sort of using it as a platform to earn money in ways that possibly would be considered not so good because some of them may be minors, and just generally regulation not being able to really keep up. So I felt like while the government is really trying, we brought out issues like child sexual abuse material, CSAM material on apps, which is very concerning because it is so easily available and it's quite frightening actually, the kind of stuff that is out there and how easy AI makes it for people to sort of send that across and spread it like wildfire. And alongside that, I think we brought out very relevant and topical things like the WhatsApp con calls. That was something that all of us experienced. And I think that was very informative and educational at the same time. So I think broadly, this was the theme that I found extremely interesting, because we're going to see a lot more of this happening as, like Nidhi said, people are going to get smartphones, people are going to get access to technology. AI is going to become very easy to use for people. And so while there is a lot of good, I think that there will be a lot of bad as well.
Right. And it's so fascinating how tech also influences how money moves these days, right? I mean, the huge boom in debt, which and credit, which Anupriya did an episode about, it's just so interesting how it's becoming so much powerful, and regulations are constantly lagging the pace at which, tech is moving in India, and it's evolving.
In fact, I remember the first episode we did on this was with Mugdha, because when we talked about, can AI really get schooled? Because they started talking about regulation in the US, and we spoke to someone who's been a data tracker, if I recall, Mukta, because that was a real eye-opener. This was before Sam Altman came to India, and ET hosted Sam Altman, but even much before that.
No, absolutely. I think that was a very interesting episode, because there was some sort of a division within the AI ecosystem. Because my episode was based on this letter that was put out by a certain, section of the tech industry, including Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, etc., who were concerned with how fast AI was progressing and how intelligent it was becoming. And they were calling for a pause on, big AI experiments. Said the fear among a lot of people, including the guest I had on my show, Max Tegmark, who is an MIT professor, the fear was a concentration of this power of powerful AI within just a few companies, and therefore the need for regulation. So definitely that was an eye-opener of an episode for me.
Yeah. So Shefali, you cover the internet culture. Does the internet need a monitor?
Like every class.
Because, does it need a monitor, and can it have a monitor? So in that sense, when you observe the internet and its sort of rabbit holes closely, is it getting worse out there?
It's a menace already. I mean, think about it, right? We've already had issues with deepfake, for instance, since Mugdha spoke about AI. You've had celebrities who have come under the scanner and then come out with explanations saying that video is actually not me, but a deep fake. You've had politicians in the last 2 years clarify that certain videos that came out about them were actually deep fakes. You've had politicians who have consciously made deep fakes, which is now being touted as a good political strategy to reach out to markets that speak a different language than you. Now, imagine a situation, and it just seems dangerous even saying it out loud, but imagine a situation where brands start using that for their sort of equivalent of a cola war. And we've had that, right? So you use deep fake to kind of create sort of chaos, and it's just endless. Controlling this is just going to be, it's going to be impossible. And there's just going to be that many people who are going to try to misuse technology that is at their disposal, because it's also free, to a large extent.
It's like dark patterns going haywire.
Yeah, it's dark patterns on steroids. And imagine that you don't need a prescription to be able to access those steroids.
In fact, Ratna, that's something that the Coca-Cola Global CMO said to you as well, that they're reforming how they're doing advertising and getting AI in. And he was just in town, and you had a chance to sit down with him, and Coca-Cola is reworking their marketing based on what AI can offer them.
Yeah, absolutely. And he says it's because, he says we've invested a whole lot of research just to sort of figure out who's watching our campaigns. And he says that, we've done reams and reams of research on, Gen Zs, the older people, the age of consumers. And for them, the big bang marketing campaign is just passe suddenly. They can have like the biggest celebrity, endorsing their brand, but, that 3-minute ad is just completely out. It's like 3 seconds. So he says we have deeply invested in AI. They've created a Diwali campaign, which he says, it is apparently going global. And the Christmas campaign of Coke, which is supposed to be the mega campaign of the year, is going to be entirely based on AI. And he says from learnings from the India Diwali AI campaign. So it's not just about the campaign. It's about, for a company like Coke, or like I said, any FMCG company, how you're communicating is crucial, because these are all only brand-focused companies. So they're experimenting in various ways, whether it's AI or whether they're cutting short their commercials using all kinds of technology basically to get consumer attention for a few seconds, maybe on Instagram. No one is watching TV anymore. So this is where tech is playing this very big role in marketing and communications in ways it has never happened before.
Just to add to what Ratna just said, she's given such a broad explanation for what is being done with our data, right? And I wanted to bring up the fact that we actually have a Data Protection Act now. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act is now a part of our lives right now. So I think we did a great episode of that. I think Anirban, you were the one who did that episode. And it really made me, I think, rethink how easily I give out my number when I go to a restaurant and, that sort of thing. So I think that was something that I just wanted to add.
Yeah, responsibility is something that's so important also. So Ratna, my favorite part of that interview with the Coca-Cola global marketing head is when he said, for my mental health, if I want to be happy, there's nothing like Coke. The overlap between what we eat and our health is becoming such a big thing. But I mean, you've done episodes on, like watch what you eat. Kiran's done that episode, and you've also asked plenty of questions about this, how what we eat is encroaching on our overall health. There were other broader questions you asked when you did an episode on greenwashing. How is that such a big story now?
So Anirban, you brought out a very interesting point. So you were talking about Indian consumers. There's a lot of consciousness that is creeping in about what we are eating, what we are wearing, but a lot of it may be a little superficial, so to say, because consumers are not walking the talk. So the Parle marketing head was telling me that it's very nice to have millet cookies on the shelf and oats and all of that. But my chocolate chip cookies are doing equally well. They are rocking. So he says, I am not cutting back on that at all. The majority of consumers want fully loaded food. Yes, there will be a set of consumers who want millets, but there are different, they are also buying these products. Okay. So the same goes for greenwashing. When we go to shop for Diwali or, for New Year, we look at the color, we look at the style, the cut, and we just buy it. So that consciousness is there at one level, but it is not really influencing our consumption to a level which is concerning. When we see a nice shade of lipstick, we don't see whether it's environment friendly, this, that. We just love it and we buy it.
I'm telling you, Kiran is not happy with your answer right now. I can see her face and she's not happy with
I can see the other faces.
Lack of environment friendly
we are all closet cookie chip addicts, but not Kiran.
Yeah. Shabura, you want to chime in? I know you interact in your field also with a lot of consumer trends and what the consumer wants. According to you, the consumers want a good bar, which you've done a great episode on, a good bar to be talking on a good Friday evening. But what does the consumer want?
So before I get to the bar bit, I just wanted to add to what Ratna was saying. It's the same thing, even in terms of the clothes that we are wearing. We did an episode on what fast fashion really costs. I know a bunch of people who are very aware of the fact that the landfills are getting higher and higher because of the H&Ms and the Zaras and the Forever 21s of the world, but that's not stopping them from buying those brands. Nobody is buying. When you can buy something for $300 or $400 or let's say $500, you're not going to go and look for an all organic shirt, which is worth $3,000 for at an Okai or any other brand for that matter, right? Coming back to the whole consumer section and bars, well, it was interesting because while we touched upon jobs and how the market looks grim and bleak, one of the bars which made it to the top 50, Asia's 50 best bars in India, right, from India, was the Mast restaurant from Bombay. And their average ticket size is $5,000. Who's going there? Who's buying 5,000 rupees?
Anupriya gave the answer. The
guys who made the
from
money.
Dalal Street.
The person from Dalal Street.
And investment bankers.
Who got the Tata Tech IPO.
To 7%.
Yeah. And the thing is, same thing goes for categories which opened up. Like beauty as a category completely blew up this year, right? And beauty is expensive. Like going back to what Arjit was saying, like Reliance.
Shabori, beauty is skin deep. Now continue.
well, we'll go with that then. But touching upon what Arjit was saying, that, the concentration of power, Reliance launched Tira, which is the episode that we did.
Yeah.
And now they have taken over Sephora.
Yeah.
So they have both best of both worlds. And again, going back to the average order value, Sephora it's ridiculously expensive. It's more than 1,500 rupees per order value. It's just very interesting that how in the same year where jobs were suffering and consumer sentiment was probably not at its best, we also had such expensive products being launched and doing really phenomenally well. So I don't know what that says about, India. I mean, going back to Arjit, what you were saying, that India is growing and everybody's constantly talking about it. I think the sectors that I'm covering is what they're looking at, and they're conveniently ignoring the parts that doesn't serve them the purpose that they want to, I guess.
We talked about the consumer being concerned. We talked about greenwashing, the choices we are making. There are two people we haven't heard fully from yet. One is Kalpana, who tracks the other side of the darker side of the real world, not the internet, but the climate and the sustainability part of it. And the other part of the dark reality of today's consumer has been health. And that's something Kiran tracks very closely as well. Kiran, this year, especially with Watch What You Eat, you went on the ground to the cancer hospital. We went together, in fact. It was a very humbling experience.
Yes.
And the pandemic is done and dusted, but the health headlines are here to stay.
Yeah, of course. See, covering health was interesting this year because, on one hand, when we were going for that cancer hospital visit, I had a presumption that, I'll not be happy seeing all these patients and it won't be kind of a great kind of experience. But over there, when we talked to these patients, we realized that they carry a lot of hope. They carry a lot of resilience. They are the survivors, and the way the institution is kind of helping them, fight back. So, that was a good picture that I came back with compared to what I had thought going. But on the other aspects, we had, we have situations where you really feel that, what is the government doing? Like last year, we talked about cough syrups. They are still making news, and government is still trying to do what it can do.
Now we have organ donation, which I'm sure will make it to the list of podcasts and something that we will look at in the coming days as well.
Exactly. And talking about consumers, living it up, so to say, you look at the weight loss drugs and what is happening to that. You have money, you will buy the drugs. And as one of the doctors told me that, they are fancy drugs and they're not necessarily going to take care of the public health problem that we have of obesity. So health also has that K-shaped economy, so to say. That trend is also playing out there. And not enough is being done on the regulatory side. That is the other part. So, we don't still have the warning labels on our FMCG packs, despite Ratna having episode on it. And, it's been a year almost. We have been seeing headlines about government setting up committees and still we don't have those warning labels. They are still dragging their feet on whether it should be a warning label or whether it should be a general label where it, actually tells person that how healthy is it, rather than saying that, okay, you're being warned about how unhealthy is it. So regulatory part is still lacking.
Which is why I guess private individuals have taken up the mantle of being a crusader. You spoke candid conversation with someone who's popularly called the liver doc.
Yes.
And that was a fascinating conversation. One of my favorites of the year.
Yeah, of course. Like everybody on Twitter knows him, and he is kind of a real exception in the sort that the way he came up through the year and the way he has been consistently, despite all the criticism and all the trolling that he faces, he has been on it, scientifically dislodging all those misconceptions that we all have, that natural and herbal and traditional medicines don't have side effects. So he has kind of consistently been there. He faced ramifications in the form of his Twitter account getting suspended and all that, but it's amazing the way the guy has kind of held on.
And I want to do a clarification for our listeners. When she says liver doctor, she means the actual doctor and not the influencer liver Ori, which is now proven to be the man who lives and is called liver. She means the actual liver doctor. Just to be clear,
Yeah,
Apurva is holding her head because she had made me promise I would not mention Ori. But we cannot go through this year without mentioning that name and what Gen Z has done.
This is the best segue ever, Anupriya. If there were
swear.
ever an award,
Oh my God.
just seeding in something, bravo. I'm actually sold.
Well, we have to make a bigger segue because health was affected by a lot of things. In fact, Anirban, one of my favorite episodes this year has been yours about health of pilots and fatigued and flying pilots. You also did one which said railways were not safe. So now I'm stuck at my home in December because I can't fly because you told me it's not safe to fly because pilots are tired. I can't go by the train anywhere because you said they're not safe. So I'm stuck at home because of you.
Yeah, and many listeners would hate me. I've spread so much negative vibes through TMB in terms of travel being unsafe, scams happening. Yeah, for sure. In fact, Fatigue Pilots was a fun episode to do because it was an intersection of what I cover outside of TMB and TMB, and we got to speak to a lot of pilots, which is the fun of audio, actually speaking to these pilots off the record, their muffled voices. And then I actually got to a senior pilot who did for TMB and for me, who actually analyzed bit by bit the pilot rosters through 3 months and saw that the results were actually staggering. These guys are really, really fatigued. They are overworked. So it was a fun episode. It was a fun episode to do.
But after your episode, we did see a policy change. DGCA did look at the problems that we're facing, and there was a mild policy change.
Yes, and individual airlines also. Indigo brought in some steps to check on the fatigue levels of their pilots. I think Air India is at least claiming that it's working on those lines. And these are the only two airlines that we need be concerned about, at least for the next 1 year.
But where policy has not kept pace has been the environment, right? I mean, that's something that you've brought out in your El Nino, which was one of the beginning episodes we did, that the little boy is going to be big trouble this year, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is our call to Kalpana, who's done the maximum episodes on this subject. Great episodes, actually.
Yeah.
Right from Joshimat to how climate change is affecting us, is leading to illnesses, which is a topic everyone is concerned about. Kalpana, this is a call to you to come in.
Yeah, Anirban, I was thinking about this morning that we began the year with Joshimat in Uttarakhand, where houses and several roads started developing crack. This was first week of January, and we are actually ending the year with Mishong cyclone in Chennai. So, this is like coming a full circle in terms of the environmental challenges that all of us are facing, not only India, but across the world. And
but Diya still made it. But Diya from Chennai still made it.
Congratulations, Diya.
I managed to dodge the crocodiles and the caving roads and everything. So, yeah, I did it for TMB.
Bravo.
Yeah. So, when I was doing that episode, Ravi Chopra, the research scientist, and he's also an environmentalist who studied the Himalayan region for decades now. His disappointment was very palpable. He said, "Koi sun nahi raha hai," in a very crying voice. And I remembered this just 2 days back with the situation in Chennai. And also when I was doing the episode on the new forest bill, a lot of environmentalists and civil servants actually from across the country wrote to the government not to pass the bill in its current form, because it was believed that it would lead to a lot of deforestation, and that would again impact the net zero emission goals that we have right now. But to no avail, the government went ahead and passed it. So that was a little disappointing. Also, the fact that because we are going through such deforestation, one of the doctors I interviewed on the episode with regard to why we are falling ill because of climate change, and when we are falling ill, we are taking even longer to recover. So he mentioned to me that how deforestation, when happens, the flies, the bats, most of the creatures which live in forests, they actually move across to cities. And that is how they change the environment of the cities, which is happening right now. And if we don't control this, if we keep on cutting trees and go ahead with massive deforestation, then we do not have great times to look forward to. Of all the episodes, however, which I did, I loved the Ratnagiri episode, which I did. My producer,
Vinay. Is it because you were getting shooed away by the authorities? Is that the running away?
That's going to be memorable for many years to come, I'm sure, because Vinay and we were warned that we shouldn't go to the protesting side, but we still tried our luck. And when we went there, we could speak to some villagers who warned us, police aa rahi hai, aap mat jao udhar. So Vinay and I, with our mics, we were actually hiding the mic and we were still trying and interviewing some locals. And then the police came with the local district magistrate, and one of the villagers says, "Madam, police." I had my tote bag. I just dumped everything in my bag and we ran from there for our lives. But next day we decided we'll go to the local authority and try and get his view. He saw a voice recorder in our hand, and he thought we are recording, which we are not actually. We wanted to interview him formally. He saw the recorder and he shouted. His secretary came. He confiscated the recorder and deleted the entire feed. Thankfully, Vinay had uploaded all that we had recorded the previous evening on the laptop already. So that's how actually we could salvage the episode. It was saved with all the recordings in place. So yeah, environment this year was the biggest theme. And it has given me some memorable podcast experiences.
And it continues because in COP, fossil fuel is the dominant theme. UAE and hosting COP. Mugdha has done several episodes on COP. And Ratnagiri is where we are planning Asia's largest oil refinery. So it's very, very timely that we are having this conversation as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I mean, like you mentioned, Arijit, I did the episode, on the primer and the explainer for COP28. And I'd also done an episode on COP27 last year. And I have noticed that in a year since COP27 to COP28, my climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, as it's called, has increased, has actually shot up. Okay. Because of just like Kalpana mentioned, the helplessness of that expert who said, koi sun nahi raha hai. And, just going into COP28, speaking to experts, reading up, I realized that there is so much apathy. The apathy has, in fact, grown. Countries have backtracked on their goals. We were supposed to keep our global temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we already breached the 2 degrees Celsius mark briefly before going into COP28. And like you mentioned, the irony of holding COP28 in Dubai and the head of an oil company leading COP28. So my eco-anxiety has shot up.
Yeah, and we are fighting over semantics like phase down versus phase out. I mean, I don't know why we do this every year. It's at one level farcical.
As Mugdha started her COP27 episode, the Conference of Parties, and I quote this, the Conference of Parties or COP is to me like a toy train that stops at new destinations every year. Global heads come aboard to play a round of blame game, even as the ride teeters dangerously close to an environmental apocalypse. I think that's one of my favorite opening lines. Yeah,
but this koi sun nahi raha thing, to I have a deja vu for many episodes.
Koi sunta kahan hai? I think those were the exact lines.
Except TMB ke listeners.
Because this tomato episode I was doing, that time they were talking about tomato prices are going up and onions and potatoes are under control. Now you see onion prices are again at record high. So I feel it's just a cycle that just we keep seeing, and whatever happens, the cycle
look at
remains.
The bright side, it keeps giving us new episodes to do. If the same thing can come back, we're already so well versed. So Kalpana has to find a way to make sustainability, sexy enough for more and more topics next year, as well as we get into it, right? So that's always a hard one to do, right, Kalpana?
Absolutely. Always trying to figure out how we can make it more interesting and break it down.
But as we shut out this year, Anirban, I think we're shutting this year out with a high from the lows can be on climates, the lows can be on jobs, but there's a definite high in the country. It comes from numbers
sure. We started
and collective
the episode,
power. And on collective power, as we said, with corporates, but not on the corporate side, right?
For sure. I mean, we started the episode with concentration of power, and what better example than in politics, which I think is going to be very big, which we all think is going to be very big in 2024. And I think segue should go to Nidhi.
Really the year of comebacks, huh? I feel, it was like the old war horses being brought back to, into fashion. People had written them off. And it's actually my way of putting it would be that, it's not over for them, right? Old politicians never die. They just repackage themselves and come back into fashion. So the recently concluded elections have actually proven that even the old guard is back in the circuit and very much back in the circuit, can't be ignored. And that's like the biggest story of comebacks. It's like, reinventing yourself and telling the party, telling yourself that, you can never go out of fashion. So it also brings forth a new set of leaders for 2024 in the States, and gives us a very interesting leadership. For me, it's like the biggest story.
Here, Nidhi, since we are in the season of segues, I'm just going to dip into that rainfall. Your episode on caste census, I think, stood out for me throughout the year. And I say this as someone who's sitting amongst such accomplished, veteran journalists here, that for me, at least, it was the first time in my career as a journalist, in over a decade, that I saw something like that was happening in close proximity in terms of like access to be able to understand, and the way you brought out the different aspects of it.
What was interesting for me was, since I started off my journey on podcasting with the caste census episode, for me in this entire podcast journey was that, when you're in normal conversations, when you are listening to people or when you're talking to people, they don't come out so freely as they do when you're talking to them. At least on this podcast, they spoke very freely. Like, we had this guest who was a former Secretary of Social Justice and Empowerment. He actually gave the government's point of view as well, as in, why caste census cannot be conducted, why even a caste survey will give you flawed data. I mean, somehow podcasting actually helps you in bringing out the best in your guests as well. So that was also a very learning experience for me as well. And obviously, the other aspect of, we haven't heard the last, and deconstructing a complicated political issue is always a challenge, but it was well worth it, I think.
To me, the Bastar episode was
yes,
groundbreaking, literally. No pun intended.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the newness of it, Arijit, I think, when you actually put it, when we were having a conversation, I remember when I was still there, and, you said that, what? I mean, why don't they want roads? Roads. How can they not want roads? So that was very exciting for me as well, that, you would think that, roads mean that they are brought closer to our concept of development. For them, it was something else. It was about preserving their culture and their ancient way of life. So it was an eye opener for me too.
Nidhi, it gets us to think that you're like this actor who had just 2 movies this year, but they were both blockbusters.
You guys
Shefali, you have touched Dia's nerve. You have touched the nerve. You've touched the King Khan nerve, which by far has to be a lot of people's favorites episode. But Dia, Shah Rukh Khan, good note to end. Dhunki coming out soon.
Actually, the funny thing is, I was really dreading the Shah Rukh Khan episode. I really didn't want it, only because of what Shefali mentioned, because, I have this personal affinity towards Shah Rukh. So I thought
that's an understatement.
Tough. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it parliamentary language. Yeah, because it's hard to sort of, I've never done an episode on like a personality that I really, really like over the years. So actually, that script was the hardest to write and was reworked the most in the history of TMB. For me, I think that script underwent the most changes. And finally, I think it came to this point where, like Shefali was saying, to be sort of objective about it, I think we managed to be quite objective somewhat towards the end. But yeah,
they are just one question. Did you cry while you were recording, or have you written a Shah Rukh Khan Aarti yet?
No, but she did.
But the thread was amazing. The Twitter thread was pretty
absolutely. Before we wrap out, I want to go around one more round across to our hosts, and if everyone could just give me one word for next year. Let's start with Shefali.
Oh, you're going to make me start with something pessimistic, yeah, but okay.
Go for it.
Survival.
Dia.
AI. I really don't see that word going anywhere.
Mukta.
No, AI was supposed to be my answer. But on a more pessimistic note, climate crisis.
Ratna.
I would say consumption.
Shaburi?
I would say market correction. I think post-pandemic, last year there was in terms of consumer market, everything was blowing up. And this year, everything is now getting flat. Like if you look at the Q2 sales of Aditya Birla, Arvind Limited, any of them, market correction.
Kalpana?
The long due TMB party.
1, 2, 3, 4 words.
Chal party. We'll stick with party. Apurva?
Yeah, I think scams, more deep fakes.
Kiran. Scams takes me to Kiran. Kiran?
ESG. The most confused and controversial name, and the way you're going to see rationalization on that count next year.
Arijit?
Election.
Midhi?
He stole my answer. Election. And that's 3 words for you, Arijit. So it is not, it's null and void. Election is what I was going to say. But now since he has stolen my answer, it has to be TMB.
Well, on that note, you know what we're starting the year with. Thank you, everybody, for a full house on this Friday. Hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did, and I hope our listeners will too. So stay tuned to TMB. Obviously, a lot more coming up.